Tune into Nice Radio every Saturday at 7:30 a.m. for A View from the Outside, hosted by Brereton Horne. A View from the Outside takes a look at key issues affecting St Vincent and the Grenadines and gives a global perspective on how these issues are viewed. Host Brereton Horne will examine a variety of topics to enlighten, stimulate debate, and explore solutions. Hear the facts, hear the real-life stories, hear A View from the Outside. Join Brereton Horne at 7:30 a.m. every Saturday on Nice Radio for A View from the Outside.
This society needs a spectacle. It might help us to see some evil. This society needs a spectacle.
On A View from the Outside this week being the 4th of February 2023, we look at prostitution, with the view being that prostitution is increasingly becoming an underground trade in St Vincent and the Grenadines, and it is eating away at the heart and soul of the nation. The Cambridge Dictionary defines prostitution as a person who has sex with someone for money. And it further states that prostitution is to use yourself or your abilities or beliefs in a way that does not deserve respect, especially in order to get money. From those definitions, we gather that when someone has sex for money or some other benefit for that matter, then that is prostitution. And that practice is sometimes referred to as the traditional form of prostitution. The someone referred to can be either male or female. It ought to be noted that whilst males also engage in prostitution, which is having sex for money, studies have shown that historically, females are more generally involved in that trade. It is worth pointing out here that when we talk about the traditional definition or the traditional form of prostitution, we include all instances of someone who engages in sexual favors for payment. Therefore, the sexual activity can take place anywhere. It can be in an office, at home, on the beach, in the bush, in the car, or any other vehicle. It can be anywhere. It does not have to be someone standing on a street corner soliciting. It simply has to be taking money for sex. It must be noted also that much of this activity is done in secret. From the definitions, we also gather that when someone uses his or her abilities or beliefs in a way which does not deserve respect in order to get money or some other benefit for that matter, then he or she could be described as being engaged in a form of prostitution. That latter part of the definition is why the descriptive term political prostitution has come about. In that context, the online publication The News Writer states that, and I quote, metaphorically, a prostitute is someone who deliberately debases his or her talent for money. A prostitute is opened for any kind of corruption or is devoted to unworthy purpose, unquote. So, if the leader of a country is accused of sacrificing the patrimony of the people of his or her country for financial gain, then that leader is often referred to as a political prostitute and one who is engaged in political prostitution. And by the same token, if someone An individual engages in sacrificing or surrendering his or her own values for money or for political advancement, such a person is also referred to as a political prostitute and one who is engaged in political prostitution. In the context of political prostitution and in reference to the same, the Nigerian Guardian, in an article dated the 22nd of June 2021, stated that the prostitute politicians come armed with the bewildering dimension of wanting to be canonized as saints. And their prostitution is so brazen, they do the act with public showmanship in the midst of large crowds. In today's program, we, here on A View from the Outside, place the emphasis on the traditional form of prostitution. And we do so because within recent times, there has been extensive discussion that many women and some men in St Vincent and the Grenadines engage in prostitution, that is, having sex for money, and that most of them do so purely out of the dire economic circumstances which exist in the country. Many hundreds of years ago, the Roman poet Marcus Annaeus Lucanus, most commonly known as Lucans, said, and I quote, "Poverty is the mother of prostitution," unquote. It is in that context, and in the context of the economic circumstances which exist in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that it must be remembered that the ULP government refused to acknowledge and publish the conclusions of the last countrywide poverty assessment report. Those conclusions place unemployment, particularly unemployment among the youth in the country, at a historic high level of nearly 50%. And that was nearly 5 years ago, when the economic situation was not perceived to be as bad as it is today. The figures from that report show that poverty in the country is worse than it has ever been. And they also show that a significant chunk of the population throughout the country are indigent poor, or that they are destitute and penniless. Whilst the ULP government has, to date, failed to publish the figures of the report, their leader made mention of the kind of poverty which exists in the country when, many believe, through convenience and with the hope of getting financial donations, he finally mentioned that extreme poverty exists in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It is therefore against that backdrop that many believe that prostitution is on the rise in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It has been said that many of those who engage in prostitution in St. Vincent and the Grenadines do so because they are at a distinct economic disadvantage. Many are unemployed or underemployed. Many turn to prostitution because they are in dire need of money to get food and other basic necessities for themselves and their children to survive. Many women engage in prostitution in order to be able to send their children to school. Many have to face the indignity of surrendering every ounce of morality which they have and engage in the trade simply to exist. Many would remember the mention by Yogi Farrell of the Parliament girls in the country. These are said to be young women who are supposedly taken advantage of by men in positions of power, including political power and financial wealth. These young women, it is said, have to prostitute themselves and supply sexual favors to these men of power and in power, just so that they can try to eke out an existence for themselves and their families. It cannot be forgotten that the mention of the existence of the Parliament girls raised the issue of human or people trafficking being practiced in St Vincent and the Grenadines. Although it is believed that most of those who engage in prostitution in St Vincent and the Grenadines do so because they are in extreme poverty, there is much talk that prostitution in the country is not just confined to those who are indigent or those who are categorized as being in extreme poverty. It is believed that some engage in the practice of prostitution so that they could supplement their income. Some engage in the practice of prostitution so that they can afford to pay their rent, mortgage, or buy something which they couldn't otherwise afford. Some engage in prostitution so that they could afford a holiday abroad. Some engage in prostitution for a scholarship or the promise of a scholarship to study. Some engage in prostitution for a grant or the promise of a grant. Some engage in prostitution for a job or the promise of a job, sometimes no matter how menial that job is. Whatever the reason for the seeming rise in prostitution in St Vincent and the Grenadines, the clarion call is made here by us on A View from the Outside for the enabling environment to be created in the country so that women and men do not have to resort to such a demeaning practice at all, and certainly not in order to get the basic necessities, food, shelter, etc., to survive, or to be able to send their children to school. Such a practice, prostitution, if allowed to continue, will continue to erode the heart and soul of the nation of St Vincent and the Grenadines. Until next week, this is Brereton Horne with A View from the Outside, with a reminder to send your feedback as usual to aviewfromtheoutside@hotmail.com. You can also get us on Facebook at A View from the Outside and on YouTube at JMB Horne. Have a pleasant day, everyone. Have a wonderful Sunday and have a positive week ahead where we all make the effort to root out prostitution in the country.